listening to our members in discernment these past couple of weeks, and I decided I too would write an 8-page sermon for today.
Yay!
Yay!
When I looked at today's passage, there's so much we could talk about that would take us down some dark hole somewhere and lead us into judgment and lead us into that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to go there. And I thought, what is today's passage really about? And it seemed to me it was about Mary's gift. That's what today's passage is about. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought about, here we are nearing the end of our Lenten journeys. We've been at this. Anybody remember when Ash Wednesday happened and we gathered here and we had our service of Stardust? Right? All those weeks ago. And so I was thinking, well, how are our journeys going? We were so pumped up. We were going to spend this time getting closer to Jesus. We were going to not only take time to be with him, but make time to be with him, to grow closer, to get to know this person who came here to show us the way. And I'm just wondering, how's that going for us? We doing okay with that?
Yes.
Or do we get too busy? It's easy to get busy, isn't it? It's so easy to get busy. There's so much in our lives that calls to us. So many people, even our critters, call to us to care for them. And strangers call to us. We might be in the grocery store or at a gas station. We might be in the public library. Wherever we are, there are people that look at us and are looking for us to be the face and the kindness of Jesus. And it takes so little of our time to do that. And yet sometimes I get so focused on all the things on my to-do list that I don't do that. And I think about it later. And I think, Jesus would have made time for that person. How long does it take? It doesn't take long most of the time. So as I thought about our journeys, I began to think about Jesus' journey, at least as it comes to us in Scripture. He's on his way to Gethsemane, where he will be arrested, and he will be tortured, and he will be handed off to be killed. He knows he's on his way. And so I thought about that, and I thought, maybe it's not just for us to remember that Jesus is with us on our journey, but that Jesus calls us to be with him on his journey. He needed his friends and companions and disciples as much as we need each other. And I think it's really important for us to remember that who we are and how we are in this world buoys up Jesus on his journey, and as he watches all of us on our journeys. I often think of Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us. Although it's kind of interesting, I do think about that, but the last line of today's scripture was what? I won't always be with you. Wait a minute, that's not what you said. You can't take it back. But I often think of Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us. And yet, I have to remember that he is also Jesus incarnate. Jesus who chose to be human and do this human condition and this human journey so we could see, not that it was easy, but that it could be done. And so I have to pause during Lent and think about what does it mean for him to be incarnate, to be part of this journey. And you heard all those prayers earlier with all the angst and heartache and the prayerful support being asked for folks and friends and family who are in situations where they need our prayer. I think about Jesus' journey and I think, you know what? He didn't arrive to lord it over us. Pardon that pun. He's here to be with us and to show us that no matter what, you see it through. You see through what it is you are being called to do, what each of us is being called to do. And in some ways, we're all being called to do the same thing. And in other ways, we're being called to do such individual things as we do the same thing together. And when he came, he didn't come to do humanity light. He did humanity in all its messiness. And we know from our own lives how messy it can get, and how uncomfortable it can get, and how deep the holes we stumble into seem, and how high the mountains we need to scale appear, and how jagged and hard the rocks we end up climbing or traversing around are. But when he came, he didn't just come to talk the talk, and he didn't just come to walk the walk. He came to be with us in the messiness of it all. And I don't think any of us can look at his journey and say, gosh, that wasn't anything but messy and difficult and tough. And yet he remained faithful. So we come to this day in his journey, and Mary comes and washes his feet with perfume and dries them with her hair. What love. What love. I'm not sure, we all come from so many different histories and backgrounds and traditions and experiences, but if you've ever had the experience of washing someone's feet, you know what love is. And if you've ever had the experience of having someone wash your feet, you know what humility is. To be that loved that someone wants to wash our feet. And don't forget, when these guys traveled along in the first century, they didn't have scooters or vehicles, or most of the time, not even a donkey. They walked. They walked, and they walked, and they walked. And their feet got dirty and bruised and tired. I don't know that I've ever been on a walk like that, but I think it must have been just such a relief to have somebody come and tend to your feet that were sore after all those days of walking. And when I think about that, I think about parents who walked not just miles, not just hundreds of miles, hundreds of miles. I can't even imagine what that must be like. Carrying a child that had to get heavy. I carry a 5-pound bag of potatoes and I'm whipped for the day. But to carry your child because you want that child to have a better life, because you want that child to have life, and so you bear that child, and someone takes your child from you. Takes the child from your arms. This child that you bore, this child that you breastfed, this child that you held close to your heart and comforted, this child that you sang to, this child whose tears you dried. And now you can't, because someone took your child and put that child in some stranger's home or some institution in a distant city. And so like Rachel, we hear the weeping of the mothers and fathers for the children that they carried and lost and grieved. Imagine their hearts. That was not the journey they imagined. The journey they imagined was one of hope that they trusted would end in joy, because there would be somebody who said, "We will be sanctuary for you." That is so similar to Jesus this day when he walks into the home of Martha and Mary and someone cares for him. Someone comforts him in the touching of his feet and the drying of his feet. How it meant so much to him, and how we are called on these days to be persons who comfort, persons who create sanctuary for one another. Because in today's scripture, even Jesus needed sanctuary and comfort. And as I listened to the news this week and the laws that were passed back in 2014 in this little tiny island over by Indonesia and Malaysia called Brunei, and they put into effect on April 3rd that if you are found and judged to be a person in adultery, and if you are found to be and judged, imagine this, a homosexual, you can and will be stoned to death. I can't even imagine what that's like. When I was an English professor, I taught a story by Shirley Jackson called The Lottery. And when you win the lottery in that little town, it's a fertility cult thing, but the corn will grow if somebody gets sacrificed, and they stone someone every year. And it ends, the story ends, with the image of the little child of the woman who lost the lot, or won the lottery, picking somebody, handing him stones to throw at his own mother. When in Scripture the woman was taken in adultery, Jesus didn't condemn her. He didn't judge her. He took a stick and he wrote in the sand. And nobody knows what he wrote. But all the people that were there gathered around, circling her, holding up rocks and large stones to throw at her till she would die. Didn't, because Jesus was there. And he wrote something, we don't know what. And he said that the one who is without sin be the first to cast a stone. And we all know none of us would cast that stone. Most of us wouldn't even have picked up a stone. But none of us, being in this human condition, on this human journey, could find ourselves in a place that fit Jesus' description of who should cast a stone. In Brunei, as in some places in the Middle East, one of the other laws that was passed was that if you are a thief and you are caught stealing, you would have your hands severed from your body. I remember hearing those stories from students of mine that came back from the first Iraq War. And I thought, oh my God, this can't be real. It's now 2019. Now, most of us are not going to be going to those fancy-dancy hotels owned by these people who put on. But I think it's great that somebody's standing up and saying, I'm not going there anymore. That's wrong. That is just so wrong. And so we find ways on our journeys to be comfort, to be just, to be those who somehow take a stand for those who cannot take a stand for themselves and say this is wrong. More and more countries have piled on and said this is wrong, it needs not to be. And the more countries that have piled on and said that, the more adamant the government of this little tiny island nation is that they will indeed put into law and into effect what they believe. Jesus would not be about that. Think about the woman at the well that was a woman with all these husbands, and her current husband is not her husband and all that. What does he say to her? I am the living water. You can go to this well if you want, but I am the living water. And so we look at these journeys and we think about Jesus, who took a leper's hand, who touched lepers that no one else would even get near, but would touch them. And would heal them. And would ask only that they give thanks to God. Not all of us knows what it's like to be a leper. But I suspect back in the 80s, John, when you first contacted HIV, it felt pretty lonely some days. That people who had been your friends shied away, didn't want to touch you, didn't want to see you, didn't want to be with you. And then somebody else came along and said, wait a minute, these are people. Remember Princess Diana, she went to, I think it was a hospital, and spent time there. It just takes one of us to do something bold and brave, and quite honestly, what Jesus would do. To come up with something that provides comfort and sanctuary. And so we have this perfume, Mary's gift, expensive perfume. And we think about it differently, I'm pretty sure, than they thought about it in the first century. How many people still wear perfume or cologne these days? Yeah, not so many. You know, in the old days, a lot more of us did, but now with allergies and stuff, fewer of us do that. But this, I can't even imagine. I mean, like, what's a really expensive perfume today? I have no clue. I'm allergic to them all, so I don't buy them. But a really, 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 really expensive one.
Anything made by Gucci or Chanel.
Okay.
Estee Lauder, beautiful.
And to take that and to use it as a gift in the face of others who would judge. You should have spent it on the people who need it. You should have spent it on those people who are poor and in need. The thing about judgment is if you listen to it, most of the time, all you gotta do is poke it and it pops like a balloon. Because those people that judge typically have a whole bunch of stuff on their own plate that probably shouldn't be there either. Who is the first to judge us? Think about that. But anyway, so here's this gift. But it's not used to entice or tease or arouse or any of those things. It's used to comfort. To anoint the feet of a weary traveler. It's often used in the first century after death for the body. And people go into all this, like, why is it used now? It's foretelling is that, you know, really, does that really matter? Here is comfort, and it's lovely, and it's fragrant, and I don't know about you guys, but there aren't a lot of plants that I can, or flowers I can smell and not have an allergic reaction. So I love plumeria because it has a really light scent to it. But imagine whatever it is that works for you as this is a scent that I love, and that becomes a gift. That becomes a gift. And she pours that loving gift on Jesus' feet. And I gotta say, when I was thinking about this passage earlier this week, it reminded me, and maybe you've heard this, there's a song, I think, I don't know what even decade it's from. I know you youngins have never heard of it. But it's Bread and Roses. How many people have heard the song Bread and Roses? It's like a women union worker song. So it's probably from the 40s.
Yes.
When the guys went off to war and the women went into the plants and whatever. And there are a couple of different versions of it, but this one's from the Jewish Women's Archives. And I'm not going to sing the whole thing.
Come on. Run.
But I would like to share with you a few of the verses. And it's a marching song because they march to it in their protest of what was happening. And they say, as we go marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty their drudging spirits knew. I just want to stop and talk about that for a second. Small art and love and beauty their drudging spirits knew. Think about the women early in the history of our country, but probably everywhere, and how they had no outlet for all their gifted, creative talents. And I remember when I was in grad school reading an essay by Alice Walker called Our Mother's Gardens. And she talked about how they had no time for themselves. They were so busy trying to support their families and have vegetable gardens and all that stuff. But they would put her in her mother's garden, and in others she presumed, they would put a small patch of flowers. But the whole garden would be beautifully tended. But there would be, amidst the necessary vegetables that needed to be there to feed the kids, there would be flowers too. And she talks about the beauty of how her mother found a way to share her creative art and artistry with all of them in a garden of just a few flowers. And that's what this song talks about. We have another 4 pages. It goes on. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Bread and roses, bread and roses. And it reminds me of this passage. It also reminds me of a story that my mother told me decades ago. I think I might even have been a kid. And she talks about when she and my dad first got married, they were very poor. As most people were back in the 40s. And so they both worked, and then she got pregnant with my older brother. And it was tough to pay the rent, to put gas in the car, food on the table. And I'm not telling a story that's probably so different from so many other people's in this room. But she she said to my father in their first year of marriage, "I want a phonograph." Now, you youngins probably don't know what a phonograph is.
Yes, I know.
Oh, you've seen it in history books, right? I want a phonograph, and I want records. Have you heard of those records?
I have.
Oh, you have a record?
I have records in the
I
church.
have records.
Oh, you have a record too?
Yes.
They've made
These guys have records.
They've made
I do too.
I'm not talking about minors, I'm just talking about records. They're telling us they have records. They didn't mention what kind of records. Yeah,
45 to
finals,
33
right,
and a half.
exactly, okay? So she said, so I want a photograph and I want records. And somehow, they managed to do that. So in the house, as they struggled to put food on the table and gas in the car and pay the rent, they had music. Bread and roses, Mary's gift to us is never to forget that we gotta feed our hearts and souls as much as our bodies. So may our gift today be Mary's gift, and may we share with those we need. Bread and roses, comfort and sanctuary. Amen.
Amen.
I still have 2 pages, but what the heck.